You're listening to KZOM, Oleander Public Radio.
Welcome to Innsmouth, stranger.
Hi, I'm Rob Whiten from the Innsmouth Book Club. Join me and my fellow guide John Chadwick as we take you on a fortnightly tour of Innsmouth. We visit places such as the Picture House, the Library and Innsmouth Museum to discuss all aspects of weird fiction, whether it be book, film, music, TV or art. As well as that, we stop over at the Gilman House to have a chat with a resident guest. That includes authors, artists, musicians, in fact Lovecraftian creatives of all types. You can find our free shows on Patreon, and there you can also sign up as a patron, which brings you bonus content, plus a monthly PDF copy of Innsmouth News, which features articles, author spotlights, all the latest news and reviews, and more. You can find us at patreon.com/InnsmouthBC. We hope to see you soon, because remember, Innsmouth isn't just a place, it's a state of mind.
Use MRP 5KM D6 to get 10%. Welcome to the world of Conquest. Immerse yourself in the epic battles and strategic warfare with our two thrilling tabletop miniature games. Conquest, The Last Argument of Kings, a rank-and-file wargame, and Conquest, First Blood, a skirmish game. What makes these games even more exciting is that you can use the same miniatures to play both. Conquest, First Blood, our gripping skirmish game. With First Blood, you can experience the intense, fast-paced battles on a smaller scale while still utilizing the same meticulously crafted miniatures from your collection. So whether you're a seasoned war strategist or a newcomer eager to embark on your first conquest, the world of Conquest offers you endless possibilities. Gather your forces, hone your tactics, and prepare yourself for the ultimate test of skill and strategy across both The Last Argument of Kings and First Blood. The battlefield awaits. Go to pgttcm.com or the show notes to find out more. Get 10% off all orders by entering code MRP5KMD6. That's MRP5KMD6. That's MRP5KMD6. Get 10% off all books, miniatures, and more. Or go to PGTTCM or the show notes to find out more.
Hey everybody, it's me, Dave, and this is the part of the show where I talk to you if I don't have someone to interview, and so today you and I are going to talk. But about what, Farmer Dave? We're going to talk about the love of H.P. Lovecraft's life, Sonia Green. Now, that may have been an oversimplification. She more than likely was the only woman that he ever kissed, at least romantically, maybe kissed at all. and they were married. So let's talk a little bit about Lovecraft's wife, Sonia Green. Sonia is referred to as a Russian because she was born in the Russian Empire and immigrated to the United States. But where she was born was actually now in the Ukraine. And it is common knowledge that she was Jewish. So, Lovecraft, who is an anti-Semite and who hates Eastern European foreigners, married one. That's actually not going to be as bizarre as it might sound, and we're going to go in a little bit about that. But first, a little bit more about Sonia. Now, when she was 16, Green married a man who was 10 years older, and he also was a Russian, and he anglicized his name to Green. They had 2 children, a son who unfortunately died pretty young, and a daughter named Carol. Carol's going to marry a man named Weld, and Carol's going to be kind of famous in her own way, at least at the time. She becomes a journalist. She collaborates, becomes basically the ghostwriter and PR guy for Frank Buck, the famous big game hunter. Writes at least one book about him. She is living with her mother when her mother remarries Lovecraft. They don't get along. She basically leaves the house and will not live under the same roof as Lovecraft. The reason why it's never really stated, but more than likely it was just Lovecraft wanted things done his way, and Carol was this very sort of independent woman who wanted things her way, and she wasn't going to let this new guy come in the house and run things over, because she was pretty much an adult, though, when they were married. When Lovecraft and her mother got married. Sonia Green's father died probably when she was pretty young. There's not a lot of information on him. And her mother basically immigrated to the United States. Sonia and her brother went to school in England for a while before mother brought him to America. This is just me speculating. As best as we know, the only country that Lovecraft ever went to outside the United States was Canada. That he loved Quebec of all places, but he was definitely an Anglophile. And so I think the fact that even at a very young age that Sonia was educated in England would have been attractive to him. Now, we don't have a lot on Sonia's first husband, Samuel. Like most, for lack of a better word, commoners or the regular people during that time, we don't have a lot of information, a lot of documentation. So the main source about him is Lovecraft himself. Now, when I say this, remember the source. This is basically a man talking about his wife's ex. So there's maybe accurate, it may be true, it may be biased. He was probably an alcoholic. Again, would not have been uncommon. He was probably physically abusive. And unfortunately at the time, that probably was not uncommon. Samuel Green committed suicide. Again, unfortunately, that probably would not have been uncommon for the time, but to best of my knowledge, the soul source of that is going to be Lovecraft. Now, Sonia is going to do well for herself, actually. She's going to run a hat shop, and enough that she is going to do well. She's going to be solid middle class, enough that she's going to become a patron of the arts, especially the part of the amateur fiction writers associations, and that's how she's going to meet Lovecraft. Now, there are two that I know of surviving stories by her. One is called 4 O'Clock. In fact, I was not familiar with that until I started doing a little bit double researching or checking in to her for this podcast. And it's not bad. I mean, it's probably amateurish, but for what it is, I don't think it's a bad story. And we're going to see some tropes that are definitely Lovecraft-like. And it's also very interesting how, it's about 4 o'clock in the morning, which, I'm not sure how well they psychologically, understood that, but I believe it's between 3 and 4 is often referred to as the witching hour or the devil's hour, and that Sonia Green nailed it. And I don't believe that was really well known until modern psychology. Now, and a lot of it has to do with REM sleep and people waking up in the middle of dreams. This is where we have this sort of intense psychological experience. Anybody that's woken up at that time has probably undergone those. And it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't really identified until later psychologists. And Sonia Green nailed it. Now, people were having this experience before, modern psychology got a handle on it. And it's possible that maybe she just randomly picked a time. But, as the story goes, there's some very good concepts. The story itself is, I don't want to say boring, but, I mean, it's pulp. Where, very, very few pulp writers are really good writers. And we're going to be a few of them. Bradbury, Asimov, Robert Bloch, then you get arguably people like Robert E. Howard, C. Barry Quinn. But the bulk of the pulp writers, even the good ones, the respected ones, they had good ideas. Lovecraft had these great ideas, great concepts, but, yeah, you're listening to a show about the Cthulhu mythos, so your mileage may vary. But it's worth checking out. You can get an audio version on YouTube. The other story, though, was first read, it was published under Lovecraft, but it was a revision, and The Horror at St. Martin's Beach. And you know what? Honestly, that's a good story. It's one of my favorite mythos stories. And it was written by Sonia Green and then revised under Lovecraft, which is how he made his money. Most of the money he made he was revising other people's work, some of which is published under his name. I think it's published now more under hers or both of their names. But when I first came across it, like in the early 90s, I'm pretty sure the anthology collection that I found it in had said it was a Lovecraft work. It may have mentioned something about it being a revision. There's a very cute story that's involved with this, First of all, it's a great book. I definitely highly recommend that people read it, or a great short story. But there's a cute story involved about how it came along. And basically, Lovecraft, Howard, and Sonia were walking by a lake at night, and something, an animal, maybe a person, was behind them and stepped on a twig, and it broke and made a very loud snapping sound. And they both jumped. And then that they saw there was nothing there, they laughed. And Sonia suggested that Lovecraft write a story about their experience. And he suggested that she write about it. And she was so moved by this that she gave Lovecraft his first romantic kiss, maybe his first kiss. And his mom had some very sort of weird feelings about sharing emotions and physical contact with him as a child. So it's possible it could have been his first contact, but definitely his first romantic kiss. It's kind of sweet. You don't really hear a lot of sweet stories about Lovecraft, but I like that one. It also, spoilers, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this next time, the relationship doesn't work out. ... Hint. Notice that I didn't say they got divorced. And that's going to be an issue. But the relationship didn't work out. And part of that, we're going to explore that in the next episode. But we don't hear a lot about the good times. And you know what? It wasn't really all bad times. One of the things is that Lovecraft and Sonia may not have been what we consider now heads over heels romantically in love. Well, that wasn't that uncommon. That's not going to be that unusual in a relationship in the 1920s and the 1930s. People very rarely did this Romeo and Juliet situation back then where they married out of love. In general, you married because of financial stability, you liked each other, you were companioned, you could work together. This sort of, I'm so in love with the person I'm going to marry, is a much later, in general, at least in practice, than the Lovecraft's relationship. So there's a lot been said because of, that they weren't necessarily head over heels. Well, they were both older. It was her second marriage. So I think we should be really careful reading into that. But we're going to share a little bit more. And a little bit more next time. We're going to talk about how this racist anti-Semitic ended up marrying a Eastern European Jewish woman. I hope that you listen in on next time when we talk a little bit more about it.
Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and all the other places where podcast stuff exists. All right, back to the show.
In Legacy Door, a lurker from space casts a shadow over time.
We opened our eyes upon the human world. We found ourselves lying on an especially yielding bed in a room displaying scattered relics of their shallow past, tied together by more recently produced items meant to blend with the relics. Typical.
A sensitive journalist dreams of unknown lives.
It seems like every time I close my eyes, they get stronger. I can't even say the last time I had a normal sleep, let alone a dreamless one.
An outspoken lawyer defends the suspect in an unspeakable crime.
And that client was Jonathan Strauss, held for the murder of his daughter Abigail and her companion Harrison Reese.
And a stalwart investigator tries to drag it all into the light.
Some of the Reeses and the Strausses have been involved with something that seems to include an obsession with bloodlines and longevity for at least decades.
Legacy Door is a weekly cosmic horror mystery podcast. An ensemble of actors tell a story, also available in paperback, Kindle, and audiobook. Available now.
Hey everybody, it's me, Dave, Farmer Dave. And we're going to be talking or finishing up a discussion we started a couple weeks ago. And we are going to be talking about Sonia Green, a.k.a. Mrs. H.P. Lovecraft. So last time we talked a little bit about, how they got together, who they were as a couple. So we're going to start off with kind of I think, sort of a funny story. So when they got married in, I believe, 1927, Lovecraft got some money to basically ghostwrite a story for Harry Houdini. And it's been published under several names. Imprisoned with the Pharaohs, Under the Pyramid. He lost it. And so they spent their honeymoon, basically, him dictating the story again and her typing it so that they could get some money in. Now, she is going to be the breadwinner in most of this relationship. Lovecraft really isn't going to have a real job his entire life, with the exception of editing and revising other people's stories. And so she's going to be the sole economic source of income. So when things go bad, she owns a hat shop, and when things start going bad and she gets sick, he's going to get a job offer to basically move to Chicago and become an editor for Amazing Stories, and he refuses it. And there's a lot of reasons possibly why. He says that it was because he didn't want to move into the cold. From a person who, grew up in California, lives in Oregon, to me, New York and Providence is as cold as Chicago, but I guess they're not. So in the first couple of years, they have a relatively average, serviceable relationship, all things considered, for the time. But as things start getting bad, she gets sick. He's not going to take on other financial responsibilities. It's pretty apparent that they're going to need to break up. Notice I didn't use the word divorce. So they separate, and Lovecraft is distraught. Eventually, friends convince his aunts to take him back in. And part of this is they look down on Sonia. That she's a working class woman. She's also Jewish, but that as a working class woman, she is beneath Lovecraft, who is the grandson. Their father is this very rich man, who of course lost all his money, so they don't have any. But there's this illusion that they are proper New England society, and she is an immigrant. This pretty much puts the death nail in their relationship. She leaves, and she believes that they're divorced. Lovecraft, and apparently lied about this, did not file the divorce papers. So when she remarries, legally, technically, she's a bigamist. She doesn't realize this until after Lovecraft's death. In fact, she doesn't know that Lovecraft died for about 10 years. They completely have lost contact. Until 10 years after he's died is she really aware of it. Now, when she marries a doctor and moves to California, when she finds out that her current marriage isn't legal and that Lovecraft basically deceived her, she's devastated. So the question is, because he never wrote, as best of my knowledge, Lovecraft never puts this down in writing or tells anybody, why didn't he do this? Why didn't he file the divorce? And the romantic in me says, well, maybe, he really did love her. He just couldn't bring himself to do it. More than likely, it might have been that, but it was more likely the shame of being a divorce, and that at least in his mind, he couldn't bring himself to file the papers because of the shame it would bring on the family, despite the fact that they're separated, and everybody believes they're divorced. So, I've stated, Sonia Green, she marries a doctor and moves to California, pretty much outlives everybody in the original Cthulhu Mythos circle. She dies in 1972, and this is the weird part to me. I was born in part of LA, only like 5 years before she died. And true, we moved out of that area, and greater LA is this huge area, but it's distinctively, highly unlikely, but it's possible that as a child, I could have walked by this old woman and not known who she was. And you think of it, Lovecraft died in the 30s, and I get now, this is like 50 years ago, but still, it's not as distant as Lovecraft. And she does put down her side of the story. And with comments, in a lot of ways, she doesn't want to spill all the tea, but she puts a lot of blame on the problems in their relationship squarely on Lovecraft's mother. And this is more than I think just blaming your mother-in-law. Susie Lovecraft had some deep-rooted psychological issues. And the ones that were treated with 1920s medicine, so they were not treated well. And I don't think it's too uncommon that a lot of people that have relationships that don't work or bad relations can trace a lot of the problems to either their or their parents' relationship or their partner's relationship with their parents. So I'm going to kind of debunk a theory that I've had in the past, is that one of, sort of literature's achievements, for lack of a better word, or milestones, is that, for Sonia Green, is that her name was the inspiration for Red Sonia. So here's I'm going to back up. I'll say there's one kind of thing besides the name Sonia. I'm going to kind of debunk that. The one thing that maybe Howard was kind of thinking about her is that Red Sonia is in, his story, The Shadow of the Vulture. It's the only Red Sonia story. And it's not this, chainmail bikini clad female redheaded barbarian that Roy Thomas gives us, but that she actually fights against the Muslims, and that she is a descendant of Polish-Russian families, and Sonia Green was born in the Ukraine. So maybe there's that, but I'm going to kind of debunk why I think Sonia Green was not the inspiration for Red Sonia. And one of it is the spelling of the name. Now, and I've talked about it in the past, maybe talk about it again, there's Red Sonja, S-O-N-J-A, and Red Sonja, S-O-Y-N-A, and Red Sonja with a J is the Roy Thomas creation inspired by the Howard creation. It gets a little confusing. But there's a third spelling. And so Sonia Green didn't spell her first name like Robert E. Howard spelled read Sonia's name, she spelled it Sonia. Another reason why I don't think that Red Sonia was inspired by Sonia Green. No one ever wrote contemporarily that it was. Now, arguably, so no one at the time suggested it. Not Howard, not Lovecraft, not Sonia herself. Now, it is argued, and this part might be true, is that Robert E. Howard was like a sponge. He took everything about him, including stuff subconsciously, and focused it into his writing. So maybe subconsciously, yes, but I definitely don't think it was conscious. Also, bluntly, Red Sonia, because of the comic books and this character that, again, was inspired by Howard, but, as a Roy Thomas character, she's a lot more popular now than she was then. And she only shows up in one Howard story. The other thing is that the Lovecrafts broke up 1933. Howard published The Shadow of the Vulture, the Red Sonja story, in 1934, a year later. Now, again, maybe this is where that subconscious part comes in, but I really doubt sometime Lovecraft and Howard had this sort of, not adversarial, but they kind of made fun of each other and got into fights like brothers almost over the past. I really don't think that he would have, published a story using Lovecraft's wife's name consciously during the breakup, not right after the breakup. And I'm pretty sure that the story some of Howard's stories sat on the shelf. Lovecraft did it more, but I'm pretty sure that this story was written about the time of the breakup. So I just can't see Robert E. Howard rubbing it in. If it had been like 10 years earlier, or right when not 10 years, but right when they got married, then yeah, I can see it, but I just don't see that happening. Now, one other thing, and I get that this is going to be a little sensitive, but as I stated in the part 1 of this, Sonia Green is going to be Russian Jew. If not, she probably was an atheist by the time she was married to Lovecraft, but she was definitely culturally Jewish. She was, educated Jewish through a traditional Jewish education. So the question comes up, if Lovecraft was an anti-Semitic, how does he marry a Jewish woman? And I had this question too. And a while back, I went to CthulhuCon when they separated the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival, and then in the middle of the month they did or in the middle of the year, 6 months in, they did a CthulhuCon. And there was a panel on Lovecraft's racism. And I asked that question. I said, how could this guy who obviously anti-Semitic be married to a Jewish woman? And I thought I knew the answer. And I was that punk kid that I was asking this panel this question. Punk kid in late 40s, but I had this, I thought I was asking the question. I knew the answer. And I thought the answer was going to be, well, if he just met more Jewish people or more people of color, he wouldn't have had this experience. And that's not the answer I got from the panel. So 2 of the panel members, one was Leland Kessler, who did, Ask Lovecraft, and the other was Leslie S. Killinger, who did, at the time, a recently released annotated version of H.P. Lovecraft. And they both answered pretty much at the same time. And I'm going to always remember, and this fact kind of influenced a lot of what I think about who I am today with that answer. And it's that racists are good at finding the good one. And you couldn't see the air quote. That Lovecraft was more concerned about appearances. And as long as she seemed to be assimilating Western values that as Lovecraft saw them, then he was fine with her being from a Jewish ancestry. We've got a few accounts where Lovecraft would just go off and vent about the Jews. And Sonia would basically interrupt him and remind him that she was Jewish, and he would apologize. So, I mean, I can't tell you exactly why they did what they did, but I suspect, too, as we find, as I study more of that time, just that this was probably more common. And that, this was not, the fact that he married a Jewish woman should not be seen as any type of redemption arc in that part of Lovecraft's life. And that he did not seem to benefit from that morally, if that makes any sense. The fact that he married a Jewish woman, he didn't learn to accept and understand people. He overlooked it on her. And I'm not justifying that, but I think that a lot of people may have that same question that I have. And so it's not a justification in any way. It's more of a condemnation that in his head, he saw that she'd overcome who she was, and I kind of phrased it that way because the other way of saying it just sickens me. And that is pretty much what I have to say about Sonia Lovecraft. That, in a lot of ways, though, I will kind of end in this. I think that she is a better example of wanting, if you want to study somebody and get an idea of what the middle class was in East Coast 1920s, I think she's a better story example than Lovecraft. And, like millions of other people at that time, and, like her contemporary Novelyn Price, she is sort of regulated or to being, the wife of a writer. But a fascinating person. Maybe one of the few people that could put up with Lovecraft's BS as long as she did. And much more complicated than these 30 minutes or so that I talked about in two parts. But by all means, there's not a lot more out there, but I would encourage anyone who's interested to just sort of research and discover her. Okay, so I think we're going to talk about a movie.
Anycuba Cobra S combo. Compared to the mainstream 3D printer on the market, Anycubic S1 is faster. The speed has improved 12 times. The Benchy can be completed in 15 minutes, that's 600 millimeters a second. Fully enclosed construction using the Cobra OS system and cooling system minimizes vibrations and enhances the responsiveness to improve the quality of printing. Anycubic Cobra S features a full metal hot end capable of reaching a peak temperature of 320 degrees. Quiet mode is as low as 44 decibels while printing. 44 decibels, that's as loud as the library, or bird calls, or a forced air furnace. Equipped with built-in camera to view the printing process. Finally, use my link to save $120. Get the combo and be able to print in 4 to 8 colors. Fast and easy to use. If you have a hobby or a business, you'll find hundreds of uses for your Anycubic printer. Use the show notes to find out anything you want. Get anything you want from Anycubic. Thank you, and back to the show.